That's right. Not a problem. It's nice to see other faces after a long time, like Ali and Sanwal. And nice to meet you, Zara.
Kulsum, how are you?
Walaikum salam. Fine.
Assalamualaikum, Ijaz bhai.
How are you?
So Kulsum, are you in the US?
In Washington at the moment, yes.
Okay, okay.
Thank you for joining, because I realize it's early in the morning for both you and Ijaz Saab.
No problem. Happy to. I'm so delighted that you're doing things on air quality, and really delighted to actually see the paper that you and Ali and Amna wrote. Excellent paper.
If we start, I think people can come in as we.
Assalamualaikum ji. This is Femina Said Chaudhry, and I am representing the Lahore Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You know, I'm on the executive board, and I also am the convener of the Standing Committee on Environment. So hence, I've been nominated to, participate instead of the president.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Welcome. So maybe we should do a quick round to introduce ourselves. I'm Ijaz Nabi. I'm an economist and I part of the board of CDPR. Samuel?
Yeah, I'll go next. I'm Samuel Naseem. I'm an assistant professor of economics at LUMS. And I regularly do work with the IGC on issues such as air pollution.
Umair?
Hi, everyone. My name is Umair Javed. I'm an assistant professor in politics and sociology at LUMS. And I'm here as a concerned resident of Lahore as well.
Henna?
Hello, everybody. So I'm Amna Mahmood. I'm the country economist at the IGC. Zara?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Zara Salman. I'm the CEO at CDPR.
Thank you very much.
Henna?
Assalamu alaikum. This is Hina Sheikh. I'm the country economist for IGC Pakistan. Who should go next?
Arif Parvez.
My name is Arif. I work for Oxford Policy Management in Islamabad, and I look after the climate change and resilience portfolio. Thank you.
Ali Ijaz.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Ali Ijaz. I am Deputy Director Environment Lahore, in charge of Lahore District, and also working with High Court in Judicial Environment Commission.
Zora?
That IGC did, and I was also a member of the Supreme Court, Lahore High Court Clean Air Commission that made some recommendations regarding the smog.
Usman Jalis.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. I'm Mohammad Usman Jalis, Assistant Commissioner General Lahore. I'm representing Commissioner Lahore for this seminar. Thank you.
Imran Khalid.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम मेरा नाम इमरान खालिद है आई वर्क विद WWF पाकिस्तान इससे पहले मैं SDPI में था जहां पर हमने एक स्कोपिंग स्टडी की थी ऑन एयर पोल्यूशन एंड विल बी शेयरिंग सम इनसाइट्स फ्रॉम दैट सो इट्स गुड टू बी हियर थैंक यू
That's all I see. Mahmood, he's joining. Okay, so I think we should start. Let me just say a few words, and then Samuel will coordinate and moderate the discussion. This is a welcome development that the climate change and the environment issue is back on the global agenda, and therefore also on our. Lekin isme, I just want to draw a distinction between what the Western concerns are. Western concerns are with global emissions and what they're doing to climate change, which is a valid concern. I think that's the overarching concern, and we all should do what we can on that. Developing countries as yet are not contributing that much to global emissions, but those countries that are developing rapidly, India, China, and others like Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., they will start contributing as they develop. So I think we should all be concerned about the emissions issue. But I think at the same time, there are concerns about what we used to call environment concerns, which are endemic in a country like Pakistan.
I think that's Kamal. Kamal, can you mute yourself, please? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so what I was saying was that we've had long-standing issues which were discussed under the general issue of the environment, which has to do with air quality and water quality. And I think we should remain focused on those issues while also giving importance to the global emissions issue. So I hope very much that this workshop will suggest, we don't want this to be a one-off event, but rather a program of events that yields issues of policy concern that we can engage with senior policymakers on, a research agenda, because that's essentially what we are, what CDPR is. It's a research platform. And also, I think an opportunity to contribute and influence the proposed Kamyab Pakistan program, because I think that program quite rightly focuses on the poor, not the extreme poor. For that, BISP works quite well, but rather the poor which are just above the poverty line and are bunched together. There's a very large number of them who are easily susceptible to shocks such as COVID, such as failure of crop, etc. So that's the group that the Kamyab Pakistan program is trying to target. But what we would very much like to do is to point out how that group is affected by the quality of air and the quality of water, and how the health costs associated with those result easily in many of them slipping back into poverty. So I think that's an overview of the kind of things that would be great if we are able to shape as we move forward. That's all I wanted to say, and Samuel, it's over to you.
Great, thank you, Jasa. I'm just going to make a few comments, and then we'll jump right into the activities. So welcome all. It's great to have you with us. We comprise a small cluster of individuals who have an academic, policy, and personal interest in air pollution in Pakistan and in the region. Let me first set the context, and then I'll explain the workshop's mechanics and some ground rules. So I'll begin with an excerpt, and this is quite fascinating, so bear with me. Masses of stagnant air wrap the metropolitan area in a sooty blanket tonight, pushing the city's air pollution index past the danger point. The smog, which thickened as the night fell and the air became dense with automobile exhaust fumes, presented a general health hazard and a serious threat to persons with respiratory ailments. The city's Commissioner of Pollution Control said the danger index reached high levels between 8 and 9 p.m., 5 times the normal amount of harmful materials in the air. The index measures the amount of sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide in the atmosphere. A reading of 50 is considered an indication of dangerous pollution. The commissioner said he was calling a first level alert in the city's air pollution warning system. Now, this is from the Chicago Tribune, November 1966. It references the hazardous smog that engulfed New York City during Thanksgiving weekend, 1966. I'm sorry I couldn't find a New York Times article on this since it's behind a paywall, but I had to settle with the Chicago Tribune instead. But sounds familiar, right? The 1966 smog event in New York City affected over 16 million people, killed an estimated 200, and led to severe health effects, including cases of breathing problems, coughing, asthma, especially among children and the elderly. The event received considerable national attention, followed by a systematic political response by the federal and state governments. The event became the catalyst for the 1970 Clean Air Act, the US's most comprehensive set of legislation to reduce air pollution and improve air quality. The Clean Air Act now covers a wide range of administrative regulations to carry out its stipulated mandates at the state and local levels. These include the National Ambient Air Quality Standards to control ambient air quality, the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants to control emissions at sources, and vehicular regulations. And what's the result of not only introducing, but also implementing and regularly revising and strengthening environmental policy? Well, the US now has the cleanest air since it started collecting ambient readings. Now let's consider Pakistan. It's not as if Pakistan doesn't have a rich history of environmental legislation. It does. Starting with the Pakistan Environment Protection Act in the 90s, which has now evolved into provincial environment provincial environment acts post the 18th Amendment devolution of responsibilities. The country has strong environmental rules and regulations on paper. If you take Punjab, for example, the province has 7 different types of pollution standards, including limits on ambient air quality and source-specific emissions. But we continue to experience extraordinarily hazardous levels of air pollution. Exposure to such toxic air carries significant direct and indirect costs, from severe morbidities such as asthma, emphysema, bronchitis, and heart attacks, to cognitive dysfunction. This includes poor learning outcomes for students, lower labor productivity, and volatility in the stock market. But here's perhaps the most shocking fact. Michael Greenstone and colleagues at the University of Chicago have estimated that an average Pakistani loses 2.7 years of their life, while an average Lahori loses 5.3 years of their life when exposed to our current levels of pollution. 5.3 fewer years to spend with your loved ones, to witness your kids' college graduation, to watch your grandkids grow up, to explore the world. 5.3 fewer years because of a colossal policy failure. Often, toxic air quality disproportionately affects the poor, who tend to be quite vulnerable to its impacts. They don't have the resources to mitigate pollution's adverse health and cognitive effects. They also don't have enough resources or the flexibility to engage in appropriate avoidance behavior. That is, limit their exposure to outside air, install air purifiers, wear particulate filtering masks. Exposure to air pollution is a large enough shock to push those on the margins below the poverty line. Now let's come back to Punjab and its environmental performance. Putting aside deficiencies in Punjab's existing standards, the province has struggled to monitor and enforce these standards, its legally mandated responsibility. Strong rules and regulations on paper does not imply measurable improvements in air quality, especially when these rules and regulations operate within a weak institutional setting. This, in fact, is the thesis of our recent IGC working paper, which charts Pakistan's air quality policy landscape. I'm a pessimist when it comes to our state, and I believe the problem ahead of us is too complex for it to handle. It just doesn't have the capacity. Instead of waiting for some miraculous intervention which propels meaningful differences in our source emissions and air quality, I feel our citizens will benefit much more by concentrating on adaptation and avoidance efforts. This includes, as I stated earlier, time use allocation, such as limiting exposure to outside air on egregiously polluted days, running air purifiers, wearing particulate filtering masks, and keeping children and the elderly indoors. Importantly, we must consider how to provide these avoidance goods and services and ensure their take-up to the vulnerable and the marginalized. I may be a Debbie Downer, but many of you aren't. You might be invested enough to see a silver lining, a glimmer of hope. And that's why we gathered here today, to connect, reflect, and bounce ideas off each other. We already know the scale of the problem, who contributes to it, and its impact. That's not our focus today. We want to figure out where have the state and its functionaries, especially departments like the Environmental Protection Department, the EPD, transport, industries, and agriculture gone wrong. Why do we continue to experience terrible pollution despite legal mandates and constant vociferous citizen hue and cry? How can non-government actors, what we call the informal regulators, support compliance? And how do we inform new government financial and social programs like the recent Kamyab Pakistan Programme so that their outcomes are tied to meaningful environmental gains? In the first part of this workshop, I'm going to pose 3 questions and assign you to one of the questions. I will then call upon each of you successively to share your thoughts with us. In the second part, we'll have an open discussion on the ways in which we can tie government programs like the Kamyab Pakistan Programme to concrete and measurable environmental outcomes. So before we start, some ground rules and housekeeping. Since we want to give everyone a chance to speak, please keep your comments short, no more than a couple of minutes. And 2, this is very important, we are specifically focusing on local air pollution, not greenhouse gases and climate change. Though one can identify overlap between these themes, we want to concentrate on policy failures that enable toxic ambient air quality. So please restrict your thoughts to air pollution, not climate change. Do you have any questions? If no questions, then I will put up the first question and the list of participants assigned to it. Please take a few minutes to reflect on this, and I will then call upon each of the participants to share their thoughts. Eamon, if you could please put that up. Thank you. Okay, so since the Commissioner Lahore can't be with us, but I believe we do have a representative, Usman Jalil. Usman Jalil Saab, are you with us? Okay, I believe we might have lost Usman Jalil, who was with us. Let me call upon, is the PDMA official with us, Mr. Tariq Faruqa? If he's not, Ali Jasab, I know you're here. So why don't you take the floor as the representative of the regulator of the Environmental Protection Department. You guys have the legal responsibility over our provincial environmental quality standards, including our ambient air quality standards and our industrial gaseous emission standards. So what have you guys done so far? What are the challenges? What has been the impact of your interventions? You have the floor, and I would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to reflect on this and share your thoughts.
Would you kindly rephrase your question?
The question is, what is the EPD doing? I mean, we could still continue. So you guys have the mandate to, the legal mandate rests with you guys, but the air quality standards still continue to stagnate, right? Why? What are the challenges that you guys are facing? What are you guys doing? and what has been the impact of the steps that you've taken?
Well, this is a long question. There is certain issues in it. That all of the mandates are not addressed with Environment Department. There are multiple issues identified in FAO reports, as you mentioned in our invitation letter. There are different sectors that are participating in it. First, most of it important is the stubble burning we see in that time. It was addressed in it. And stubble burning mostly related with the agriculture department. To coordinate all these department, government declared that whole issue a calamity, and PDMA is a coordination department between all them, which coordinate between the departments. It make a crisis room in it, in where the High Court appointed a judicial commission sits, where senior member board of revenue as a relief commissioner sits on daily basis and look after this. Stubble burning, I think, is related with agriculture. Transport sector is the combined sector in which environment, traffic, and transport departments are working. This is also a joint effort. A specific related only task with the environment is the industries. We are looking after the industries that are polluting or don't have emission control systems only. But overall, the whole scenario you can say it's related with environment, because the environment ultimately got polluted and air quality deteriorated with time. But there are multiple factors and multiple departments. There is a coordinated, this is the coordinated effort, and PDMA is looking in it. First, I clear my department. Second, the steps we have taken up till now. The calamity is declared by the government, and we see that the brick kilns have a major issue in it. We adopted a zigzag technology, which from Nepal we imported, and more than 90% brick kilns have been converted to zigzag. If we see the report of whole Punjab, there are about violations in 200 or 300 brick kilns out of 8,000 brick kilns. That is a huge achievement, that more than 7,500 brick kilns are complying with the zigzag technology and reduce their share in the smoke.
But Alisa, there was that report recently which said that that's wrong. They mentioned something about how these kilns haven't been converted. I would just kind of like your quick thoughts on that. Is that the case or not?
Yeah, it is the issue. We impose about 40 million fine on about 400 brick kilns in whole Punjab. 40 million fine is a huge figure if you translate it, and that was not we are not possible to impose that fine before the intervention of High Court. Last year we have no tool to implement it, but this year we are imposing fine on them. We are shutting down them, we are sealing them, we are throwing water on them to extinguish their fire. This is the continuous issue. Actually, the zigzag technology was adopted, and it was very easy to convert from old bull thread technology to the zigzag technology. But vice versa, it can easily be also reverted back to old technology. In April or June, when we completed our survey through PDMA and online app, the whole Punjab was covered, and it was 7,900 something brick kilns to be exact, that were converted to zigzag technology. All brick kilns were mapped, their coordinates were recorded, and pictorial evidence was also present with PDMA. But the issue is that it was very easy to revert back. You simply, there is this method of stacking bricks in your kiln, and you can easily convert it to old technology as you can convert it to zigzag. The people have lack of expertise in it. The people who make loss in it due to lack of expertise are trying to revert back. But there is also a benefit in conversion of zigzag, that the coal prices are increasing hugely. They said a simple truck which they use is cost about $1 million now, and if they save a truck, this will save $1 million to them, and more than 30 to 40% savings in coal. So that forced them also to the conversion back to the zigzag technology, but the expertise of labor and technical labor are restricting them. We are also forcing them.
Sorry, Mera ji, इसमें एक जरा सा question, you don't mind my cutting in.
No problem.
The question is जी कि ये जो brick kiln की industry है, इसको government ने अभी तक cottage industry में रखा हुआ है. It is not formally declared as an industry. नतीजा ये होता है कि none of the laws that pertain to industry are, covered by them. So they consider themselves as a cottage industry. आपने उनको एक लीवे दिया और एक बीच में रखा हुआ है जाना वो इधर के है ना उधर के. That is why, you know, it is very difficult to control them and very difficult to make them conform to various modern technologies.
Well,
So I think this is one of the problems that you're having.
No, that is not the issue. For that, the government declared smoke as a calamity and gave us a powerful tool. High Court is also supervising it under Judicial Environment Commission. We didn't have an issue for enforcement in it, but the issue is the technical issues. They didn't have the expertise for that. They didn't have a skilled labor for that. Still, we are enforcing them. More than 90% have been converted. This is not a small task to convert whole Punjab into a zigzag. I think that's a tremendous task that this government was able to achieve. And what else we can do?
Ijaz Sahab,
The answer to Saval's question that the government is not doing anything, I get from your last, the point, Ali Ijaz Sahab, that you raised. आपने ये कहा कि actually 90% of the brick kiln, more than 90% have been converted. तो इसलिए मुझे लगता है कि इसका जवाब ये है कि ज्यादातर तो हमने ये काम कर लिया हुआ है. तो okay, well that's encouraging. Is that the general view of people?
I think so.
I would agree with that, Ali Habib. Okay. I was involved in this, so I think this is one of the successes which should be acknowledged. One important point is that partly it was successful because it was a financially viable alternative.
Agreed.
So your 10%.
I disagree that it's successful.
Okay, Rafe, great that you joined us. Bataएं, what is your view?
No zigzag brick kiln emits within prescribed environment quality standards for industrial gaseous emissions. It's a suboptimal technology that has been adopted as policy by the government of Punjab when pollution control technologies exist in the market, are much cheaper, and provide PEQS emissions within PEQS.
That was going to be my follow-up question to Ijaz Sahab as well. So Ali Ijaz Sahab, Rafi raises a good point that this conversion, do we know whether the new technology, the emissions from the new technology is within our mandated standards or not?
I welcome Mr. Rafi. He's a good fellow. The issue why we adopt zigzag technology, as I mentioned earlier, it is very easy to convert. We can easily save a fuel in it. More than 30 to 40% saving in fuels means more than 30 to 40% reduction in emissions as well. It not only reduce the particulate matter, it will also reduce the carbon footprint of that vehicle. That is the one point. Secondly, it is not complying PQS. I agree with him, but we have achieved 40% less emissions in it. There are certain steps government working on it, that first we converted into the zigzag technology, which reduced 40% emissions. Then that smoke we collected in a blower and in a chimney. It was very difficult in all cold trench technology that we can't apply a scrubber on that. After that, we can apply a scrubber on that blower and easily convert it into the PQS compliance unit. That is not a difficult task, but the difficult task is to conversion into zigzag technology, which cut down the emissions to 40%, clearly.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that we don't come across as prosecuting the government's representatives. So we want to keep our discussions cordial here.
लेकिन सावल ये बड़ा अच्छा point अली इजाज साहब ने जैसे इसको discuss किया है, क्योंकि it shows compliance up to a certain point. लेकिन as Rafi was saying, we still fall short of meeting the required standards. तो अब हमें एक jointly एक program identify करना है, whether it's research or it's active policy engagement, कि वो जो आखिरी स्टेप्स हैं जो कि कंप्लायंस को इम्प्रूव कर देंगे, वो क्यों नहीं लिए जा सकते और कितनी जल्दी लिए जा सकते हैं। तो आई थिंक we've come to a good point on this intervention. आप अगले डिपार्टमेंट्स से पूछें।
Okay, we also, I just want to give, since the transport department representative and the commissioner's representative aren't here, we do have the ag department representative, and I do want to turn our attention to him. Rana Mahmood Saab, you're on the call, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
मेरी गुजारिश है कि हम उर्दू इंग्लिश दोनों में बात करें, क्योंकि बाज़ दफ़ा चीज़ें ज़्यादा बेहतर एक्सप्लेन हो जाती हैं उर्दू में, तो इसलिए अपनी मर्जी से इस्तेमाल करें इस बात को।
Mahmood Saab, so crop burning, उसके भी इंडिया में भी वो बहुत होती है, लेकिन उसमें जो दिखा रहे हैं क्या कहते हैं reasons, well, interesting. There's these labor market distortions, basically, jahan a lot of people are leaving from rural areas and going into urban areas. And that's basically made a lot of labor expensive. And so farmers are just not able to afford that kind of labor, right? And so what they end up doing is they end up kind of like burning the stubble. And then there's this various programs on the Indian side of Punjab where they're trying to incentivize farmers to adopt these new technologies. But the way that credit financing is done, there's a lot of restrictions in that, and there's a lot of hurdles in that. So farmers aren't effectively able to take that credit and adopt these technologies. So अगर आप बता सकते हैं कि ये हमारे क्या हो रहा है, क्यों crop burning के आप लोगों ने जो तहकीक की होगी, reasons for that, वो भी labor market से associated हैं, technology से associated हैं, और उसमें क्या आप लोग कर रहे हैं to ensure कि you're not hurting the farmer either, but what are the kind of interventions that you're thinking about?
जी, थैंक यू वेरी मच। बिल्कुल ये दोनों चीज़ें ही हैं, लेबर मार्केट डिस्टॉर्शन भी है इसमें, और टेक्नोलॉजी अडॉप्शन जो है बाय फार्मर्स, ये दोनों चीज़ें ही इसमें आती हैं। लेबर मार्केट की डिस्टॉर्शन का आपको, जैसे जो इंडिया वाले आपको बता रहे हैं या उनसे है कि जी मार्केट में लेबर इतनी अवेलेबल नहीं है, क्योंकि ये इशू ही तब शुरू हुआ जब से मैनुअल हार्वेस्टिंग से हम मैकेनिकल हार्वेस्टिंग और कह लें कि इम्प्रॉपर मैकेनिकल हार्वेस्टिंग पे हम शिफ्ट हुए हैं। हमारी पैडी की हार्वेस्टिंग जितने भी है वो ये रहा है कि इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ लेबर और बिकॉज ऑफ द शॉर्ट विंडो बिटवीन द हार्वेस्टिंग ऑफ पैडी एंड द सोइंग ऑफ व्हीट, देयर इज ओनली अ विंडो ऑफ ऑलमोस्ट 1 month। तो इसमें आप किसान ने अपनी पैडी को हार्वेस्ट करना है और उसने अगली क्रॉप की तैयारी करनी है। उसको जब लेबर नहीं मिलती तो उसको जो भी किसी किस्म की भी इम्प्रॉपर मशीनरी मिलती है तो वो उसके जरिए हार्वेस्टिंग कर लेता है। इम्प्रॉपर हार्वेस्टिंग से मेरा मतलब ये है कि जो व्हीट हार्वेस्टर हैं, कंबाइंड हार्वेस्टर जो हैं, उसके ऊपर थोड़ा सा वो उसका चेंज करते हैं, एक उसका फीडिंग यूनिट जो है, और उसके जरिए से मार्केट में सेम जो व्हीट हार्वेस्टर्स हैं वही हार्वेस्टर जो हैं वो यहाँ पर भी पैडी के लिए भी यूज हो जाते हैं। और उसके जरिए से ये होता है कि आपका जो पैडी की क्रॉप है, इंस्टेड ऑफ हार्वेस्टिंग द पैडी फ्रॉम नियर द रूट ऑफ द प्लांट और द क्रॉप, आप ऑलमोस्ट फ्रॉम जो हमारा इम्प्रॉपर जो व्हीट हार्वेस्टर जो हम पैडी के लिए यूज कर रहे हैं वो ऑलमोस्ट मिडल ऑफ द क्रॉप से उसको काट देता है, और तकरीबन 1 फुट तक या 9 इंच तक का जो एक स्ट्रॉ जो है ना वो अलॉन्ग विद द स्टबल वो फील्ड में छोड़ देता है। अब इस स्टबल का जो मिक्स करना है बैक इनटू द फील्ड इज ए मेजर टास्क, और ये नहीं हो पाता क्योंकि आप जो नॉर्मल हमारे कल्टीवेटर्स हैं या दूसरी मशीनरी जो है वो इसके ऊपर सही नहीं चलती। तो अल्टीमेटली फार्मर के पास ये ऑप्शन रह जाती है कि मशीनरी सॉल्यूशंस मौजूद हैं। मसलन मशीनरी सॉल्यूशन इसका एक तो ये है कि बाकायदा से क्या नाम है इसका, मशीन अवेलेबल हैं जो कि राइस श्रेडर जिनको हम कहते हैं, लेकिन दैट इज एन एक्सपेंसिव ऑप्शन। 2-3 हज़ार रुपया कम से कम पर एकड़ की उसकी कॉस्ट है, और वो आमतौर पे फार्मर यूज नहीं करता। फिर होता यही है कि इंस्टेड ऑफ गोइंग फॉर एनी मशीनरी ऑप्शंस आफ्टर यू हैव यूज्ड दिस improper harvesting machine, तो आप उसको आग लगाते हैं कि आपके पास कोई भी अगली लैंड प्रेपरेशन के लिए फॉर बीट आपके पास ऑप्शन कम हो जाती हैं। इसका सोल्यूशन यही है कि हमने ऑलरेडी स्टार्ट कर दिया हुआ है कि प्रॉपर जो राइस हार्वेस्टिंग मशीनरी है उसको प्रमोट किया जाए, और वी हैव ऑलरेडी स्टार्टेड दिस। हमने राइस श्रेडर्स जो हैं वो भी हमने सब्सिडी के ऊपर और बड़ी मेजर सब्सिडी दे के हमने स्टार्ट किया हुए हैं। 80% सब्सिडी के ऊपर हमने पिछले साल से भी और इस साल भी दोनों सालों में हमने ये काम किया है, और तकरीबन ऑलमोस्ट 500 ईच, जो कि शायद अभी बहुत ही कम है कंपेयर टू what is needed for proper handling of the whole crop। तो हमने ये स्टार्ट किया हुआ है। इसके अलावा अब ये हो रहा है कि जो प्राइवेट लोग हैं उन्होंने जब देख लिया है कि लेबर मार्केट जो है वो डिस्टॉर्ट हुई है, तो जो प्रॉपर मशीनरी इसकी उसका एक हार्वेस्टर कहलाता है, ब्रांड नेम ही है, कबूटा हार्वेस्टर है, जो जापानीज मॉडल है और चाइना से भी आते हैं। वो अब लोग यूज कर रहे हैं, लेकिन वो अभी इतने अवेलेबल नहीं हैं। और उस हार्वेस्टर जो कबूटा जिसको मैं कह रहा हूँ, ये भी वही हार्वेस्टर, ये वो प्रॉपर हार्वेस्टर्स हैं जो कि क्रॉप को बिल्कुल रूट के करीब से काटते हैं, फिर आपको क्रॉप बर्निंग की आपको जरूरत नहीं पड़ती। अभी हमने प्राइम मिनिस्टर का जो एग्रीकल्चर ट्रांसमिशन प्लान है उसमें हमने ये जो हार्वेस्टर्स हैं जो इंपोर्टेड हैं, जो उनके ऊपर भी हमने सब्सिडी अनाउंस की है, और इस साल से वो 3 साल के लिए प्रोजेक्ट स्टार्ट हो रहा है, और इट्स अ मल्टी बिलियन रुपी प्रोजेक्ट। इसमें हम ना सिर्फ ये कि राइस श्रेडर्स, हैप्पी सीडर, पार्क सीडर्स और जो कबूटा टाइप प्रॉपर हार्वेस्टर मशीन्स हैं ये हम सपोर्ट करेंगे, ये हम सब्सिडी के ऊपर देंगे, और इसके ऊपर सब्सिडी भी 50 to 60% सब्सिडी जो है वो गवर्नमेंट प्रोवाइड करेगी। अनटिल अनलेस फार्मर को आप कोई अल्टरनेट सोल्यूशन नहीं देते, ठीक है, और सिर्फ आप ठीक है अवेयरनेस से और जो हम प्यूनिटिव एक्शन भी कर लेते हैं कि जी पर्चा करवा दिया, ठीक है, जुर्माना कर दिया, उससे कुछ ना कुछ कंट्रोल हो जाती हैं चीजें, लेकिन अल्टीमेटली जब तक आप फार्मर की जो है जो अल्टरनेट सोल्यूशन जो है उसको प्रोवाइड नहीं करेंगे, और चाहे वो सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स के जरिए से जो बड़ी मशीनरी है उनको मिल जाए, या इंडिविजुअल फार्मर के लिए जो मशीनरी है जिसको हम राइस श्रेडर या हैप्पी सीडर या पार्क सीडर कहते हैं वो मिल जाए, या कबूटा हार्वेस्टर या प्रॉपर जो हार्वेस्टर्स हैं वो फार्मर को ना मिल जाए थ्रू सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स, तो ये इशू जो है वो हम इंशाल्लाह हर साल जो है ना अक्टूबर नवंबर दिसंबर के महीने में ऐसी बातें करते रहेंगे, और ये राइस हार्वेस्टिंग का जो इशू है, पैडी की जो बर्निंग का इशू है, वो ऐसे ही चलता रहेगा। we have taken, agriculture department Punjab has taken steps in the right direction. We have already started providing this machinery on a subsidized basis to the farmers, and we are continuing this subsidy machinery subsidy in the coming 3, 4, 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahmood Saab. Okay, that was interesting to hear. So I'll turn to Tehmeena Sahiba. You're with us, right? So, what kind of engagement are you guys doing with the EPD as the representative of the Chamber of Commerce?
Basically, ज़्यादातर problems जो हैं pollution के, air pollution के, वो industries, उन industries के लिए हैं जो कि which use furnaces and boilers and etc. और वो emit करती हैं gases जिसकी वजह से ये सारा कुछ होता है। So उसके लिए ये है जी कि they need equipment like cyclone collectors or electrostatic respirators or bag filters or scrubbers, etc., which obviously is an expensive solution. Basically, ये सब polluters या ये सब industries जो उसमें हैं, they come under the SMEs. And basically सबके capital, let's say crore या 2 crore है, तो उनके लिए ये expensive solution जो है ना बड़ा मुश्किल होता है. We requested the government many a times that the government of Pakistan, if they want कि ये सारा कुछ करें, तो they should grant them interest-free loans, or they should give them low interest loans ताकि वो ये install कर सकें ये सारा equipment, because उनके लिए बड़ा मुश्किल होता है ये equipment install करना, because normally they don't have that much extra money to do that. So दूसरा ये है जी कि हमने ये भी देखा है कि basically EPD and other government organizations जो हैं वो penalize करने में बड़ी तेज हैं. You know, they don't really give solutions to the industry कि वो क्या करें ना, बस उनका basic ये है कि penalization करें. We've also requested them कि जो industries हैं, small industries that are fully complying with EPD directives and standards, उनको आप कोई breaks दें, encouragement like tax breaks दें या कुछ, so that there be other industries are then encouraged by this whole thing and ये करें. तीसरी ये है जी जो कि बड़ा मसला है इंडस्ट्री को is that जो standards enforce करते हैं EPD and government, whether they are for air, exhaust air or water, ये सारे जो है ना जी, they are not cognizant of ground realities के क्या हैं, you know. So we want कि ये को local conditions के मुताबिक अपने जो हैं standards को एक modification करें. That's our problem that we have with the government. And that's why penalization के मैं तो नहीं देख रही कि government industry को कोई खास help कर रही है in this you know area. That's our problem.
No, to some extent I understand industry se concerns kya hai, but just to kind of sort of play the devil's advocate here, the fact is that it's a common pool resource, right? This air belongs to all of us. Industries are basically emitting pollutants in there, and this is agar koi regulation na ho, so it's basically they're not paying. It's an input effectively into production, right? It's an input that they're not paying for, because agar is pe charge hota, so wo you guys would have had to bear that, right? Now you guys are earning profits and incomes by polluting a shared commodity, right? So, and if there is a regulation, so the industries should I understand that like incentivize.
I agree, but the fact is that they can you also educate and you hold hands. You just can't do that one fine day. You just say कि भाई ये regulation है, and you don't give them time or resources or energy or anything, finances to convert. I mean, I feel that the industry should be educated in this matter. I feel that the industry should be helped in this matter, you know, rather than just penalizing them like that. They can, just for instance, most of the industry, why were they polluting these small boilers and furnaces? They were polluting because probably they weren't getting gas, you know, which was burning their furnaces. Probably the, you know, other petroleum or whatever, I don't know what they used otherwise, was also expensive. So they resorted to burning old tires. That was actually how this whole thing started. And we requested the government कि जी आप prohibit करें, आप पुराने टायरों के ऊपर duty ज़्यादा करते, so that they become a more expensive commodity. Nothing happened. So these are the things where I feel that the government should interact with industry and then ask them what the problems are, rather than एक theoretical किस्म की एक वो करें. I don't know, but that's how industry feels at the moment. I can only tell you. We are trying our best. Obviously, we know that we take in the same air that our chimneys are emitting. We know that the water we are drinking or whatever is the same and we try our best. But the problem ये होती है कि छोटे जो एक होते हैं industries, I wouldn't call them industries, enterprises, उनके लिए बड़ा मुश्किल होता है. अब मैं आपको एग्जांपल देती हूँ. आप देखें कि सियालकोट जो था, it was basically a sports city, okay, and they realized कि छोटी-छोटी tanneries अंदर शहर के अंदर थी residential. एक तो ये भी मुझे बड़ा एतराज है कि गवर्नमेंट ने कोई जोनिंग नहीं की, कोई एरियाज नहीं किए कि भाई these are the residential areas, industry should not happen there. देखिए, because बड़ा मुश्किल होता है एक चेंबर को कंट्रोल करना अपने मेंबर्स की एक्टिविटीज का. We need the government to put in various, directives and various things like these. So कोई areas नहीं था. Normally होता है कि industrial area, residential area के बीच में एक green barrier होता है, which then controls the whole things. But हमारे यहाँ तक residential area में थे. अब इसी तरह सियालकोट में residential area के अंदर छोटी-छोटी tanneries लगी हुई थी, which meant कि वो सारी water जो था tanneries का was going into your nalis and going right into the ground, and which was raising, and these were heavy metals, they were chromium, they were arsenic, they were all sorts of chemicals going. So the government and the chamber requested the government, World Bank ka loan government ne diya, and they created a zone outside Sialkot city where they provided, small industries, government ki taraf se a water treatment plant और ये सारा, because अब देखिए छोटी टैनरी के पास ना जगह होती water treatment के लिए, ना उसके पास finances होते हैं water treatment, because an average water treatment plant is 1 crore rupees and it needs 1-2 canals ज़मीन to build it. So government provided all these, they are shifting there. So obviously pollution खत्म हो रही है ना उस area की. So that is how I think the government should help industry. हम ये कहना कि जी आप एक pollutant हैं, बहुत बुरे हैं. I agree with you. I agree that we, but help us. Help us.
All right. Amina Sahaba, so we need to kind of move forward, but thank you for those remarks. Well taken. Kulsum Sahaba, I know you have your hand up, but you actually, so I just want to put up the second question on the screen, and then I'll give you the floor so you can have all your comments kind of, present them at the same time.
Okay, why has existing policy struggled? I just hearing this conversation reminds me of several other cities. Because in a way one can learn a lot. As you were talking about Chicago initially, or actually London was the first Clean Air Act in the 40s and 50s. But if you look at Delhi, for example, and I think Delhi is a better example in the context of discussing Lahore, because air quality is not just made up based on emissions, it's also based on the wind patterns, the humidity in the air, the rainfall, the whole meteorology and the physical geography of a city. So if you look at it that way, actually a lot can be learned from Delhi. In Delhi, they actually did go through this. They converted the buses. They said, oh, that'll solve the problem. They moved the industries to Gurgaon. They said that would solve the problem. And all of these things solve the problem temporarily. But ultimately, the city has just kept growing. And just because it's kept growing, you're going to constantly have problems. And it may be different problems because by then the cars may be the problem rather than the industries. So if looking at tackling air quality really requires, it's a science. It's a bit like the way we're handling COVID. You actually need real data. And as far as I can see, there is no real data. We are using emissions inventories to decide, and also just based on this feeling, because we see lots of smoke or whatever coming from the fields or wherever, and we say, oh, this is the problem. I worked in Monterrey in Mexico. They have limestone quarries there. Everybody said there is lousy air quality here because you could just see white dust everywhere. When you actually did a source apportionment study, it actually showed that the biggest contributor was unpaved roads to PM 2.5, which is what affects health. It was not what anybody expected. So I think that is the one point that I think is lacking in all of this discussion, is actually real source apportionment studies and working with the scientists and engineers to do these. Emissions inventories, such as the one that FAO used, are based on historical data in terms of weather patterns. And that is changing with climate. So you cannot rely on that in the same way. Second thing is emissions inventories. Well, it's a lot of modeling, and typically whenever, and I've worked, I don't know, 20 years on this and helping every Latin American city, and most of them successfully clean up, like Bogota, Santiago, etc., Mexico City, as well as in South Asia, as well as involved with Beijing and many, many other cities. But you have to do the two together. You do source apportionment and you do an emissions inventory, because you're constantly trying to validate one against the other and adjusting your model accordingly. So to me, that's part of the problem that I'm having with this discussion, because I don't see where the science is, where the scientific data on what is causing the pollution. It's like saying there is COVID, everybody needs a vaccine and everybody needs to wear masks and so on, and they do. But when in the areas where it's really bad, that's having the smart lockdown, as Pakistan is doing. They're having smart lockdowns in specific areas. So actually trying to figure that out based on real data, I think is important.
Kulsum Sahib, just a question on that.
Yeah.
Experiences in Latin America, how often do they conduct source apportionment studies? Because in Pakistan, that's one of the gaps, right? Like the last source apportionment study here was done by the FAO, and that used sort of remote sensing data. So it had like a lot of sort of variation.
Which is not source apportionment. Remote sensing is not.
It's not exactly, but it's sold as exactly. So we really don't have a good sense of what the attribution to sources is. But how often would you do that in Latin America?
Well, the thing is, often these things are done, over a period of a year, because you see in the seasons the things are different, and a year, 2 years, and on a regular basis. Again, it depends where, because you obviously have to choose sites in a city. And the problem, if you like, is how constant your weather remains. We have a problem because with climate, things are changing a lot. Humidity is changing, that affects pollution. The temperature is changing, that affects pollution, because the emissions go into the air, and then you actually have chemical reactions going on in the air, which are actually then some of them creating some of that pollution. So it's not that you just put it out and then that's it. But there's a lot happening after that. So you're kind of starting with emissions and you've got air quality here. But in between, you've got the weather influencing a lot of things. And the physical geography, because you know already, everybody knows here, the concept of inversions, and in Lahore, that's the case. I must admit, when I started writing about air quality in Pakistan about 5 years ago in the newspapers, because I was so shocked actually to discover that Karachi had bad air quality. The only reason I did that was because Karachi has a sea breeze. So even though it's a city of 30 million people, at least based on my evaluation, it's probably easier to clean up than Lahore. It's a shocking thing to say, but that's the reality. Because of the winds, you can, if you do certain things, you can actually clean it up way faster. So I think that's one thing that is also needed, is being able to realize that it's very city specific. So what happens in Lahore versus Multan, and maybe you're making decisions such as, okay, we are not going to let Lahore get larger. Maybe that's the more important decision, and help the other cities in Punjab, smaller cities, grow and have a lot of small, connected, compact cities. So I think that's an important aspect. Now, the other thing I want to just mention is putting in these long-term signals and incentives for change. And firstly, regulations. Yes, there are regulations, but actually the regulations are not formulated based on health. So actually, if you formulate them based on health, they'd actually be quite different in Pakistan. They'd probably be well, firstly, you'd have a PM 2.5 standard, which you don't at all. So you have to actually put in put in regulations that are based on health. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it's not just environment in a vacuum. The whole concept of regulations, as you pointed out, actually came about in London, in the UK, literally in London because of the fogs. I think there was an incident where something like 4,000 people died. It was so bad. It's basically for health reasons. That's the reason you have regulations. Otherwise, you wouldn't need them. And those regulations are different based on the airshed. So if the airshed is prone to inversions like Lahore, Lahore should have totally different standards than somewhere in the middle of Punjab or in another city in Punjab. So that's the problem also, because then that sets the signals in terms of incentives. So that's one. The second is this monitoring and reporting, because you need a lot of people. Everybody needs to understand why, why they're doing it. So, and then this thing about whether it's profits over, you have to decide, okay, we are helping certain groups because we need to push these, to keep this industry or whatever in the city. Well, you need transport. You're going to keep transport in the city. But if transport is the problem, then you look at it a lot of different ways. You look at it in terms of moving the traffic, things like your traffic signals, how they come on and off, that matters too, So the traffic keeps moving. That actually affects, for example, Moscow is affected a lot by that. You can, and even Bogota was. So it's things that you may think are like, oh, just timing the signal so that they go, so the traffic moves makes a difference. There is one other point I'm going to make, and then I'm going to stop because I'd like a discussion, and I'm happy to come back on any of these points. But there are some things that you may want to address at even a higher level. So, for example, the fuel oil for the burners, that actually thankfully has improved, again, the government is pushing in the direction of trying to improve it. But for years, actually, we had lousy quality fuel oil. So how can you then expect, everybody to tell everybody, oh, you have to all put scrubbers? All you're doing is you're shifting your cost. You can address it much easily upstream by actually having better quality fuel oil. And then, yes, you're paying for better quality fuel oil, but you're shifting the cost at a different point, as opposed to asking, thousands of people, thousands of industries, hundreds of thousands of industries to put in stuff. You're saying, okay, we'll just get cleaner fuel. It's the same thing with the transport, with the cars. There's one thing in terms of, that was Mexico City, is all about cars actually, because the pollution was mainly from old cars. So there, they focused on cleaner gasoline, cleaner petrol, and then accordingly priced it so that you could actually have an incentive to move to that. So anyway, I'll stop, but I'm just giving kind of three sets of ideas of, if you like, the long-term signals that I think will help.
Right. Tied to that is also this question about how do we get clunkers off the road, right? So you can have like better quality fuel, but you really have to kind of.
But there's a way to do that too, because other cities have. It's not. It used to be, and the other thing is the two-wheelers. It was rickshaws in Dhaka. I mean, that also. There are ways to do all of these things, but they have to be done with that particular industrial group or whatever, the stakeholder group. You have to work with everybody together, and they all have to decide this is what we want to do. That's why you think of what are the long-term signals and incentives for change, and see if those can be put in, because that in a way gets you much further than saying, oh, let's attack these guys only, because you'll attack those guys, solve that problem, but then tomorrow it'll be a different problem. It'll never go away, basically.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So again, I'm cognizant of the time, and we do need to kind of rush through, well, not rush, but sort of give space to everyone. So Imran, you're next. I know you guys at the WWF have done the scoping exercise, and I believe, you were involved with the SDPI, and at some point SDPI was supposed to do a source apportionment study too. So I'll just, give the floor to you and have you share your thoughts on the work that you guys have done.
Yeah, thank you, Samuel. We're definitely having a great discussion here. So the scoping study that we did, it was a South Asia-wide study that was done at SDPI. I'm not really sure whether the WWF here has done one, but that looked at a number of things that we are currently discussing. So it looked at source apportionment. So it was essentially a desk study that looked at air quality across South Asia, as well as the information that was available. We did some focus group discussions. We did some key informant interviews to see how we were responding to the air quality crisis. So as you know, this has been going on for a number of years, and that was in that light. So the comments that I'm making right now, these are, I guess, my own personal ones there, and this isn't from WWF's point of view, although I do work for WWF. So let me start by just responding to Kulsoom Saba here. That thank you for your comments, ma'am. So the PM 2.5 standard does exist. So for example, if you look at the Punjab Environmental Quality Standards, we do have that 24-hour average, as well as the other one, but it's probably not in line with the WHO standards, and that's what we really need to talk about. So having standards is not enough. Those standards need to be in line with the regulations set by World Health Organization. So let's take that as our starting point, because they've done the research, they've got the data. Let's do that. Let's not give ourselves some leeway just because we can. If there are certain standards that are applicable to human beings worldwide, we should adopt them. We've been talking about zigzag technology, right? So there's been this discussion happening on how zigzag technology that's available is 40% cleaner than whatever the number is. And we all accept it. And my question is to everyone here, why aren't we challenging this zigzag technology, given the fact that it's polluting, given the fact that it's not in line with the environmental quality standards? Let me ask you a question. What if I were to say that, look, I'm going to give you a glass of water. It's not meeting the WHO standards, but I tried my best, and it's 40% cleaner than where we were yesterday. So if you won't drink that glass of water that I'm giving you because it's polluted, why are we accepting that it's okay to have polluted air from zigzag technology and we're breathing it? So there needs to be some discussion on the stuff that is happening, and we really need to be vocal about it. The second thing that I want to talk about is how this is an equity and justice issue. We've been talking about indoor air pollution in this country for decades now. It's been a problem. We haven't talked about water problems or water quality issues because everybody's gone and gotten their bottles from Nestle or Coke or wherever they get those from, or they've got access to filtration plants. But the poor and the people who do not have the means, they're drinking poor quality water. So it's air quality has become an issue because it transcends those lines, whereby it's affecting pretty much all of us equally when we're outdoors. Indoors, those of us who have the means are relying on equipment that cleans up the air. So as far as what the policy measures we've got up till now, I think they've been lacking in political support. We've been paying lip service to this, and we talk about smog every year. The word reaches the prime minister makes a statement, and then there's some action done on the ground. There are commissions made, there are committees made, and we get together in panel discussions and on TV and talk about this, and then There's a rain event, and February comes and March comes, and then we move on. Air pollution is a national issue. It's a and this is what I said on Twitter, and Rafa said it's a transboundary issue, and that's perfectly correct. And it's affecting us 24/7, 365. So even though the air quality in Karachi is better, I'll agree with Kulsum Sahaba, but if you look at the areas where the pollution is affecting the communities, and it's still not the AQI levels, there are days when it is still very unhealthy. The air quality is very unhealthy in Islamabad right now. You cannot see the Margala Hills from the 0 point. And that's because smog is a problem here. Air quality index in Peshawar crossed 300 2 days back. Again, we need to talk about this. Kulsum Sahaba talked about the source apportionment studies, and I totally agree. We need to do that. I know that there are a couple of professors who are looking at doing some source apportionment studies at NUST. My understanding is that a similar study was happening in Peshawar. I'm not really sure what the status is, but these studies only began last year. So it will be some time before we get the results. Having said that, we do not need to wait for these studies to understand that our industries are some of the most polluting in the world. Our fuel quality in vehicles is some of the most polluting in the world. Our vehicles that might be able to utilize the Euro 5 or Euro 6 standard fuel that's available now lack in catalytic converters. So there's that. You need that side of the story as well. And then we can talk about brick kilns, and we can talk about the crop burning and that sort of a thing. And here I think again, I come back to the equity and justice issue here as well, because it's easier to go after a single farmer or a brick kiln owner, or because they do not have the resources to shut out the EPD monitors, the enforcement agency here, and then that's a problem. As far as the EPD is concerned, उसके ऊपर आगे भी बात होगी, and capacity के बहुत ज़्यादा issues हैं. EPD को हम blame कर सकते हैं, but unfortunately हमने उनको दिया ही क्या? They've got their hands tied behind their back. उनके आप जाके human resources देखें, आप उनके पास जाके technical capacity देखें. There's a reason for that. EPD to me needs to be an independent agency, just like it is in the US, for example. जब तक के उसके अंदर आप secretary हर 3 महीने बाद change करेंगे, उसके अंदर political appointments होंगी, you'll continue to see this mess, and it goes beyond the EPD. It transcends across the governance mechanisms in this country. So I'll just stop here and look forward to hearing more about. Hearing more from others. Bahut shukriya. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Imran. I like that point about equity as well, because that ties into the fact that pollution, there's evidence to show disproportionately affects the poor, but also in terms of like information, often air pollution information that you can access to then engage in an appropriate avoidance behavior. That's also often just available to people who have, let's say, access to the internet, right? Or who can download the Air Visual app and look at that data in real time. So it's often the poor who don't have that kind of access to information. Now, I want to turn to Rafe. Rafe has been, I guess, one of the oldest and most resolute voices on environmental problems in Pakistan and Punjab in particular. Rafe, perhaps you can comment on some of these legal hurdles or institutional hurdles that we face in terms of improving our air quality.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Saval. This year with the reaction to the air pollution has been telling. The environment minister tried to hide behind a nicety that it isn't technically smog, and then requested the FIA to conduct an investigation into private monitors. Our special advisor on climate change blamed India, and the information minister, the federal information minister, blamed the previous government. This sort of finger pointing is very important to keep note of, because I'll come to this in the end when we need to talk about a vision. But when I see this sort of finger pointing and lack of clarity, I have to remind people just how bad things are. Now, Lahore is at the epicenter, along with Delhi, of air pollution issues in North India, if not the subcontinent. We're at 1.1 degrees of global warming. And according to David Wallace Wells in his book, An Uninhabitable Earth, the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees of warming has been calculated or estimated to be about 150 million lives that will be lost mostly in Asian and African cities on account of the air pollution there from the transport and energy sectors. Now, 150 million people are 4 times the number of people, soldiers, who died in World War I and World War II put together. And after this recent COP at Glasgow, we are looking to smash the 2-degree warming barrier towards the end of this century. We know what we need to do. It's in not just the Clean Air Action Plan of 2005, the Mansoor Ali Shah Lahore High Court decision of 2008, the Smog Policy of 2017, the Smog Commission report of 2018, the Punjab Clean Air Action Plan, and the standing orders of what to do in cases of bad air pollution, all detailed in the EPD website. In great detail, we know what we need to do, but we seem to be focusing on just a few things. We're focusing on the brick kilns, and we're focusing on happy seeders. And as Imran just pointed out, we tend to think that this is either a Lahore-based issue or a seasonal issue, when in fact it's a regional issue and it's a year-long issue. The sources of air pollution are the same throughout the year. The air pollution emissions are the same. I do echo Kulsum's point about fuel standards. And while the government of Pakistan has requested oil marketing companies to import Euro 5 fuels, and the one refinery amongst 5 in Pakistan that can produce it is producing Euro 5 fuels, there are still no Environment Protection Agency fuel standard upgrades. We have fuel standards mandated by the Environment Protection Agency from 2016 that put in a PARC 2 or a rough Euro 2 standard on fuel. Those desperately need to be revised. There's also the underreporting of AQI, which was somehow a mistake made when adopting the smog policy of 2017. Instead of using the 50-point gradients that classify air pollution according to US EPA, the Punjab EPA has used 100-point gradients. So you're getting different underreportings of air pollution publicly being broadcast. And this is not good public health messaging at all, especially during a crisis like this. I again agree with Imran with the EPD and EPA upgrade, but want to go further by reminding everyone that the World Bank gave a $270 million loan to the government of Punjab to upgrade the Environment Protection Agency in 2018. And it is telling that the department and the agency have both had 6 secretaries and director generals transferred throughout of them in the last 3 years, which points hugely to the failure of governance here. I'll go and say that air pollution in Pakistan is a governance failure. The Environment Protection Council, which is legally mandated to formulate and implement environment policies for the Punjab, has not convened. It convened once a year and a half ago, and that too on the directions of the court, but not since then. This is not good implementation of the very detailed policies that already exist. Now, I also sympathize with industry to some extent, because getting these, especially the large number of SMEs on board with emission control is going to be expensive. That's very much the case. But look, there are very good examples of how China used the private sector and induced them to invest in greener technologies through a raft of different measures that even included green indices, green insurance, and having their company's regulator put out disclosure requirements that tested sustainability and greenness in the corporate sector. These are all measures that can be taken that aren't the regular carrot and stick type of enforcement that we're doing right now. You can't seal industry and expect development economically. You have to induce the private sector through means. And I think our regulators and our policymakers need to move beyond this idea that you can seal businesses and really look at the polluter pays principle as a sophisticated financial regulatory machine that needs to be appreciated and implemented. And lastly, I've been talking about this for 6 years. We need to be angry. We're not angry enough. We speak this secular technical language about happy seeders and brick kilns. 5 years of our life is being taken away on average in Lahore because of air pollution. The future of our children is on the line, right? And it's only going to get worse. We need to be angry, and we need to understand that other cities and countries that have tried to tackle air pollution have understood that it takes not years, sometimes decades, certainly longer than the political cycle. And so what we really need is a common and shared vision that could withstand the political cycle. And with this finger pointing right now, it just doesn't seem to be, the atmosphere doesn't, to use a pun, doesn't seem to be conducive to a vision. And that's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafi. I think the things that I'm angry about is like a non-exhaustive list. But I like that. So that point about governance. So I think Ali Habib Saab and I kind of allude to that in our IGC working paper as well. The stats on the number of times the environmental councils have met in the past 4 years is astounding. Like, they're not meeting the minimum required of meetings. And this is the regulator of the EPD, right? I mean, in fact, Ali Habib Saab actually argues that this is perhaps the most salient failure of like environmental governance in Pakistan, which is quite shocking. Right, so now I'm going to turn to Davar Numan Bhatt. Davar, you've written a paper recently on the power sector as well, which is kind of, you guys are doing a emissions inventory for greenhouse gases. But I know you've actively involved in pollution data gathering activities and talk about this transition to cleaner fuels. So, it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
अच्छा, सबसे पहले तो थैंक यू वेरी मच सावल, आपने हम सबको यहाँ इकट्ठा किया, बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ कि आपने दावत भी दी. To start off with the question that has been put in front of me, data, and sort of also why has policy struggled. So I was taking notes from the start to what to speak about, and मुझे आपने जब शुरू किया कि how New York had this very damaging smog episode, so there's a video from 1961. It's on YouTube, and it's one of the few reports that you find about the US crisis that is on video, because it's such an old era, people don't really upload old videos on YouTube. So उसमें ना काफी मतलब मजे की बात सबसे पहले उन्होंने की. उन्होंने दिखाया कि there's a furnace oil power plant running around the city, Edison Power का power plant, and these guys are running it, and then the narrator says that the emissions coming out of this chimney are equivalent to running 12 incinerators at the same time. And incinerators, by the way, had already been outlawed after the World War II. So the point there being that you've outlawed certain technology, and you're running a technology that is equivalent to running 22 of those, because waste management at that point had not been issued. So we have those issues at this point. We don't have a waste management strategy. We have waste burning in the city. We also have furnace oil power plants, 7 of them running around Lahore. And as it stands, our refineries are still producing high sulfur furnace oil. And a lot of the power plants are ancient. They're 20 years old now, these IPPs, and they don't really run on clean fuel anymore. So that's where things stand when we compare ourselves with the US of 50, 60 years ago. Now, the things that have been mentioned on why people like me want to fill in the data gaps or whatever way it's been possible, we have to really go deep into all sorts of government documents and private sector documents, oil refinery documents, OMC, retail fuel audits, all of it, just to be able to calculate what sort of aerosol and carbon emissions we're putting out from the fossil fuel industry. None of this information is publicly available. A lot of the information that we discuss, such as who is in the Environmental Protection Councils, what sort of work they've done, among the authors of the Smog Commission report, who are the air quality experts and whatnot. So a lot of these things are not publicly shared, and to resolve this issue, you have to start with public information disclosures of yearly data, daily data, all sorts of reports, meetings of documents, what sort of procurement has been done for certain monitors, what sort of, who decided these monitors are going to be important, and what sort of maintenance and accountability mechanisms are going to be in place. We have none of that. So public information disclosure is one thing why policy is struggling. until and unless you start putting this out, there will be a distrust. And the distrust stems from the fact that we look at water quality, we look at soil quality, and we have enough evidence that the governance within Pakistan isn't strong enough to be tackling these, and hence we come forward to fill in these gaps. Now, the next question, even chat box, the policy when we are discussing brick kilns and zigzag kilns. So I was discussing this with an architect in Lahore, and he told me that purchasing the clay bricks, the ones that are made in the bull trench kilns or zigzag kilns, the 1,000 brick trolley now costs 18,000 rupees to purchase in Lahore. And at the same time, buying a cement block trolley costs 14,000 rupees. So people are actively switching to the cement block ones, and government hasn't done anything about like it's not a governmental push. Cement block manufacturing is relatively cleaner because the facilities are bigger and you can put scrubbers and everything at the point sources, and they're much more formalized than brick kilns. So whenever we talk about zigzag kilns, my first question is who decided that the zigzag kilns are going to be the right intervention in our case? And why did cement block production not get a priority here? Why can not an incentive be put that cement block manufacturing will be done? And these bricks, by the way, I'm in Karachi right now. I escaped Lahore this season because I did not want to sit through the smog. So I'm in Karachi and everyone here uses the cement blocks. The brick kilns are not accessible in Karachi. You won't even see anything in the outskirts of the city. So cement block is already widely accepted in the big cities. From Gilgit to Karachi, that particular form of brick is prioritized because it takes a lesser fuel, it takes a lesser amount of resources, and produces less emissions. And at the same time, for some reason, it's obviously a big business lobby as well, the Brick Kilns Association, but they could have incentivized, we've given them loans, billions of rupees spent. It could have been an incentive towards the technology that would be a much more longer term solution. So this is again, why was this policy prioritized? What was the sort of decision making happening? And is it something that you saw that Nepal is doing? So let's do it in Punjab as well. It simply cannot work that way. You have to contextualize the policy that you're making and then support it with the evidence that these will be the results. Now, for the past 2 years, there was a ban on brick kiln operations. So this year, that ban is a little half-hearted because you have to go and inspect that if this is a zigzag technology or not. Now, I was talking to an assistant director, EPD, and he told me that ये मसला ये हो रहा है कि आपने zigzag technology की सारा कुछ फिट तो कर दिया है, लेकिन जो प्लेसमेंट होती है ब्रिक्स की जो आपने करना होता है वो अब हम किस तरह चेक करें रोज रोज जाके कि वो वाली प्लेसमेंट हो रही है कि नहीं. सो आप अब 8,000 brick kilns अगर पंजाब में हैं, आप कैसे जाके रोज रोज चेक करेंगे कि ये हो रहा है कि नहीं. So the alternative was that a separate technology would have been more preferable here. And again, before starting the conversion, you should have done some sort of apportionment. What is the contribution? And afterwards, you could have checked that this impact has been made. Now we don't really know about that either. The next point is again, Punjab and Lahore cannot deal with this alone. Certain elements in the policy are a federal issue, particularly the petroleum division. And you have no Euro 5 high-speed diesel in Punjab as things stand, because the fuel supply does not work that way. If we start right now to upgrade the refineries, we will have Euro 5 fuel maybe in 3 to 4 years. So this is another thing, that there's no Euro 5 fuel. If you've been reading in the news, it does not work that way. Fuel supply is a federally regulated rule under the rule of business. It's federally regulated, and Punjab simply cannot say or claim that Euro 5 fuel आ गया अब तो pollution हो गया. अब इसका भी policy बना ली है, but when you interact with the OMCs, and again I'm saying Euro 5 fuel, this is petrol. This is not high-speed diesel. We have to differentiate because diesel here is the one that produces aerosol. Euro 5 diesel is not available in Lahore. Euro 5 diesel is not available in any city in Punjab. Currently, Euro 5 diesel is only available in Karachi and Hyderabad because the policy of distribution of petroleum works that way. When you import high quality Euro 5 diesel, it will be distributed to the nearest cities because then it makes economic sense. certain part of the import is being rerouted up country as well through the white oil pipeline. But what is happening is that local refineries don't produce Euro 5. They also use that pipeline for Euro 1, Euro 2, and Euro 3 fuel quality. So the pipeline essentially is mixing it together because pipeline can differentiate what's in the pipe. So you are putting the same different sort of fuel standards, and what is reaching Lahore or Multan is going to be something around maybe Euro 3 or Euro at max Euro 4. So again, you don't have clean fuel. And of course, emission standards is again certain thing that also works with motor vehicles. You don't have emission standards for vehicles yet. There are no requirements for diesel particulate filters in engines. There are no vehicle retirement policies. So this is a huge chunk that the federal government is responsible for, and it has not filled in for the past 3 years. And again, we expect that the local refineries will get an extension for the upgrades. So these are the policy failures, I would say, and policy gaps, wrongly identified prioritization, which is why current policies and interventions are not working. To simply speak, when you discuss with any sort of oil industry expert, when you discuss with sort of environment or climate change, it is internally also accepted that none of us or none of them alone can resolve this. A lot of these policies are very, very multi-sectoral in nature, and they have to be devised in a way, and they go step by step as they reach the provinces and the local governments. So in a sense, the biggest failure in my view, I'll again just list them down. Information disclosure is not happening. Local contextualization policy isn't happening. And since these are multi-sectoral, there's no coordination or collaboration between federal, provincial, local enforcers, administration. And until you have that, you cannot resolve this issue for Lahore, Punjab, or all of Pakistan. So thank you. That's it from me.
Yeah, thanks, Zaved. By the way, that point on vehicular standards is an interesting one, because given how we attribute, given how we state that cars and vehicles are the largest source of emissions, at least in urban settings, we really have very weak standards on vehicles, no tailpipe emission standards, for example, and like you said, nothing on vehicle retirement or on smog checks or regular smog checks. Or inspection licenses, etc. So that's a big gap that I think, and that actually falls under the EPD, right? Because it's or the transport department for that matter. But these guys haven't really resolved this problem yet. Like, which sector, which domain is the EPD responsible for vehicular emissions, or is the transport department, right? So
even I'll just answer that briefly. There is, I think, a vehicle inspection piloting project going on in Punjab. Currently, transport department checks the vehicle emissions from commercial vehicles. And I know because commercial vehicles get route permits for certain roads, they are checked on those roads. So I'd say that EPD perhaps is the right department to be making these checks. It doesn't make sense, especially in the urban areas, if there's no local government. EPD is the right body because they have the environmental expertise, at least when it comes to doing random checks in laboratories or whatnot. So we cannot have like different departments dealing with these checks and that checks. Makes sense to sort of getting them together in one place to deal with.
Fair. Yeah, thanks. All right, so now I got to move forward. Tabby, thank you for joining us. I know you are, leading advocacy movements. You have that big event tomorrow, or you're one of the organizers of that event. It'll be great to have your thoughts on this.
Hi, well, thanks a lot, Sambal, first of all, and to Zara and everybody at CDPR for organizing this workshop. It is a really critical topic. We're all breathing it, we're choking on it. Even if you're in Karachi, you're dealing with this polluted air. I guess just to add to many of the really important points that people have made about the local issues, I will kind of offer more of a global perspective. And that is, first, that we know that 10 million deaths happen around the world from the air pollution crisis, and it's not just in places like Pakistan, it's definitely not just in this region. Of course, that doesn't let the regulators off the hook for failing to implement the existing regulations here. But I do think it's important to think about why this phenomenon is occurring globally. We've heard about the smog nightmares in London back in the 50s and LA in the 70s. We continue to hear about the toxic effects of air pollution around the world, especially wherever there are dense concentrations of vehicles and industries burning the dirtiest fuels. And so I don't want to challenge those who've said we need more data, we need more apportionment studies, because more data is always helpful. But also quoting David Wallace Wells, who Rafe quoted earlier, he said, whatever we burn, we're breathing. So it's also a little bit like common sense that if you know dirty fuels are being burned in X number of industries across Punjab or even just within Lahore, that tells you a lot about where the pollution is coming from. If we burn it, it's in the air, we're breathing it, especially when we have this thermal inversion over our heads, making all of those fuels just concentrate in the air around us. So in that sense, add to the industries and the petrol burning and the power plants, we also see really high volumes of garbage being burned here because garbage is not being managed effectively here. And also there's the issue of overproduction of wasteful plastic and other packaging products that are totally unnecessary. And then you have things like pulverizing of the hills to make concrete, to get at minerals, all of that, including construction dust, all of it winds up in the air. Erosion from deforestation, land clearing, all of it contributes to that. And these are activities that we know are not unique to this region. These are activities that are part of the global development model that, that all of us are operating according to around the world. So in other words, the smog crisis is just one of many of the symptoms that are presenting themselves as part of what the United Nations is calling Code Red for humanity. This is a failed model of development, and even the richest, supposedly most pristine countries in the world are cleaner because they've outsourced their development, their industrialization to places like Pakistan, who fear losing investment. I think a number of people have talked about this already. If they actually do what needs to be done to protect citizens from being poisoned through these activities. Here in Lahore, I've actually met quite a few garment workers, also in Faisalabad, who are working really long hours in horrifying conditions, exposed to toxic environments inside the factories, getting burned from the chemical dyes, dealing with polluted water in the factories and also in their communities outside of those factories, and sometimes even losing fingers in the machines. So it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the workers, it's bad for the community. And the people, we often hear, well, these are jobs, we need jobs, jobs are important, but we're dealing with an issue of mass unemployment here in Pakistan and also in much of the world, not because jobs aren't available, but the jobs that are available are dangerous, they don't pay enough, and we're seeing this more and more in the US as well. People just are not willing to put themselves in those conditions unless they absolutely have to. Now here we see a lot of people really do have to, they have no choice. And so what else is driving the production of this kind of, these kinds of activities is the fast fashion industry providing cheap clothes to people in the West. So why should Pakistanis actually be putting themselves in those conditions to supply massive amounts of clothes to the West? We're told it's needed for the economy and that the global economy is supposed to somehow be rational, but there's nothing rational about what's happening. I read a few weeks ago that there is a massive glut of clothing on the market that, you know, it's shipped from Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh to America. And the clothes that don't sell there are then shipped to Latin America. And the clothes that don't sell there are just shipped to piles and piles, the size of mountains in the Chilean desert. They're just piled up, unworn, unpurchased clothes. So there's nothing rational about producing all of these clothes while hurting the workers, while hurting the, you know, the communities here, while putting us all into a toxic environment. There's nothing rational about it. So I think it's really important that we remember that what this region needs to deal with the smog crisis is the same thing that the rest of the world needs to deal with the climate crisis and the other health crises that we're dealing with. And that is a massive Green New Deal type program, which puts people to work in sustainable systems of production that actually meets local and regional needs for clean and safe transportation, food, housing, water, and health, rather than sacrificing themselves for so-called development objectives and for people in the West to get excessive cheap clothes. And it might sound utopian, but I think it's pretty utopian to think that we can continue as we are and expect that somehow our governments are going to, you know, implement some regulations or band-aid solutions and deal with it. I would say that our governments and even international financial institutions took major investment actions for the pandemic when the economy was collapsing in 2008 and also in war times. They need to stop giving subsidies to the polluters and letting them poison the public with impunity. They need to stop giving massive injections of funds to our militaries, whose activities are actually also massively polluting, not to mention in many cases, well, I'll leave it there, definitely anti-people in a lot of ways. And we also need to insist that rich countries pay their fair share for the clean energy transition. So also, I just wanted to add to this point that people have been making about the role of the market in firms and dealing with this whole issue. And I would say that there may be ways, Rafe talked about what China has done to really make private firms actually do the right thing in a lot of cases, but nationalization can also work in a lot of cases to scale up production and dissemination of clean energy technologies, the way they've done in the past for producing weapons and other technologies at large scales during wartime. Because if there's anything that the last 30 years have shown, is that a market-led green growth plan has totally failed in tackling the environmental and health crises that we're facing today, let alone in a fair way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabby. Thank you. You know, that point about waste management, which Kulsum Saab has also mentioned in the chat box. I think one of the policy failures is that these guys haven't been able to devolve responsibility from like the state level to local bodies, right? So we don't have people like we can hold accountable when we see like waste burning happening in our like neighborhoods, etc. So that point about, I mean, you can have some level of connection between the federal, between the federal government and the provinces, but these guys are really stalling on like devolving that responsibility further down. So that again adds to this argument of reviving local bodies and holding those elections ASAP. Moving forward, we have Rafiq Saab with us, who is at IM Sciences in Peshawar, associate professor there. Rafiq Saab, welcome to the workshop, to this discussion. You know, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shawal, for having me, and thank you for organizing a very wonderful discussion on reasons for bad air quality in Pakistan. Well, I've been, just working on air pollution and valuing the environmental health impact from last couple of years, being part of the SND and EC mode. Like we've tried to explore the reasons and the impacts on health and different parameters given the epidemiology literature, and then translating into values and finding out the welfare impacts, etc. So given all that, I would agree with what has been said so far. I would agree with Kulsum Ahmed. The points raised by Kulsum were very relevant. Imran Saqib, I would agree with you that even in Peshawar we had AQI, and I've seen myself on this AQI app that it was beyond 300 at night in the Kent area where we don't have industries. Rafi Adam has raised many important points. So to cut it short, well, my perspective on the reasons for air pollution and why we have failed so far is number one, we don't have data. We don't know what are the reasons for air pollution. Like, for example, just across the wall where I live, I live in Hayatabad. Just across the wall, there are crushing stone industries, and we requested PCSIR to have, just give us the data as what is the level of air pollution, and you won't believe that it was 2350 when it comes to PM10, 2350, and this is by the PCSIR. And just 5 kilometers away from this site, it was 45. So if the monitoring was done wrong, so it should be wrong at that another site as well. So crushing stone industry is the reason, and then there are other steel industries across the wall. These are the reasons. Traffic is a big mess in Peshawar, and even in Lahore. Like, I've been to Lahore so many times, and I've seen the traffic mess. So apparently, when we look at the traffic mess, qualitatively, judgmentally, we can say yes, traffic is a big culprit. The Euro 5 fuel point raised by Noman Batsap is very relevant. Well, the reports which I've seen is only 10% of the fuel used in Pakistan is Euro 5, the rest is not Euro 5. These are the reasons. We didn't have any environmental council meeting in last 10 years. Since it was established, like since 2014, we had the Environmental Protection Act, and we didn't have a single EPC meeting. And then we leave it to the EPA, and EPA, what they do is they just go after industries, and then they punish them, fine them. 50,000 is the minimum fine in KP, but they can make it in half an hour. So what is the incentive for me to install scrubbers? If the traffic is the culprit, which I don't know, like Kulsum said, we don't know about the source apportionment. So but judgmentally we can say traffic is the reason. So do they have the jurisdiction to improve, just as the oil suppliers, to improve the quality? We don't have the car maintenance certificate issued here, or even in Lahore, or everywhere in Pakistan. 25 years old car and 30 years old car, everything is on the road. The roads are not properly metalled. Side of the roads are still brown, where either they should be gray or they should be green. Then the waste is burned at the site. We don't have landfill. I'm sure even if we have in Lahore, it's not properly managed. It's a big source of energy, can be, but nobody's using it. And then things are in silos. Engineers don't talk to sociologists and environmental economists, and so there's no kind of collaborative effort. So we can inform the government as what are the reasons. There are lacunas in our law. You find them, you just shut down the factory, like we had this in Peshawar. So they go to High Court and they get the stay and then start burning again. So my basic assertion here is that we don't have data. and we don't have data, and we lack the institutional capacity, and we don't have this collaborative mechanism. It's a right step. What you are doing is, trying to involve different people from different backgrounds and seeing what are the reasons and what are the, the problems. With this, I would stop here, and I would hand it over to you. Back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rafiq. Yeah, that's a good point about networks. And that's perhaps one of the things that we do at IGC is to try to liaison as much as we can with government stakeholders, because we can't effectively design policy if these guys are not on board. That's integral to any policy making. Right. So now who's Sharia, Eamon, one of you is responsible for the slides, right? We've got a final question, and we've got Ali Habib, Imrana Sahiba, and Sara with us, who are assigned this question. So I'll start with Ali Habib. Ali Habib Saab, you were on that SMOC commission. The SMOC commission, which the Chief Justice of the High Court at the time, Mansoor Ali Shah, created. That was after that violent, we've had violent episodes of SMOC for the past 5 years, but you guys came up with an effective air pollution control plan, a set of recommendations. You had all kinds of stakeholders on that commission. Talk us through what happened. Why hasn't that really translated into any meaningful impacts?
Thank you, Samal. So I think, first of all, we have to sort of recognize that we're in that kind of space where the phrase, whatever we do, we will only go from worse to bad. And it takes a while to recognize that worse to bad is an improvement. So I think, first of all, I'd like to focus a bit on, let's say, the court's activities were sort of overlapping between regulatory and public pressure, the informal regulator, voluntary space. So I'll enter into that space with a few comments. But before that, I'd like to comment that the important thing here to recognize is that we are talking about air pollution caused by, let's say, two big brackets of activities. One of them is clearly illegal. So, for example, burning of rice stubble, emissions from steel re-rolling mills, emissions from brick kilns, they fall into an illegal category for various reasons. And then there are other sources such as vehicular emissions, which are not illegal, but are still harmful. So at least burning of municipal waste is also illegal. So in the beginning, at least the illegal sources should be addressed. Now, before I start talking about the informal regulator or the voluntary space, what can be done, I'd like to just confirm what you also alluded to. The failure of the regulator in Pakistan starts at an extremely high level. It is not EPD who is responsible. If you take the analogy of a private company, so if you have a chief executive of a large company who never comes to office, never holds board meetings, and somehow the poor engineers are still supposed to construct bridges and do their work, that is what's happening for the environment. The Prime Minister of Pakistan is supposed to hold 2 meetings per year of the Pakistan Environment Protection Council, and the chief ministers of provinces are also supposed to hold either twice or 4 times, depending on the province, as a legal requirement. It is an enactment of law that requires them to hold these meetings. They are not. So it's not surprising if the chief ministers and ministers are sleeping, then how can we blame the EPDs and the other government departments? So there is a very serious failure of the regulator and the government. And by the way, this is not unique to Pakistan. Even India has very similar dynamics. And we're not even talking about corruption where private industries can pay the regulator to keep my factory running or to keep my gas in my pipeline going. So that's a completely different dynamics. So coming to the courts, the commission's recommendations. So the commission recognized, I was the chair of the voluntary subcommittee, so therefore I focus more on that. And there is a feeling that the public needs to wake up too. If our children are suffering, we can go blue in the face complaining the government doesn't do anything, but at least we should do what we can. If a municipal waste dump is being burnt near our house, we can go to that site, put it out with a hose of water, complain to the local body, talk to our local councillor. So there are many things we can do. So the public needs to wake up. Expecting the government to do something, I'm not saying we should give up, but it's like flogging a dead horse, unfortunately, at present. Now, the areas that were suggested by the commission, there are three big areas. So rice stubble burning, steel re-rolling mills in the industry sector was identified as one of the main culprits. Ms. Temina was also active in that commission, and she offered to bring the steel re-rolling mill representatives together to set some kind of voluntary joint targets and municipal waste burning. So these three areas, I think there is a lot the voluntary dynamics in society can do. And the voluntary action is to point out and assist the government to meet their own laws. This includes lobbying to the chief minister and to the prime minister to hold their council meetings. Regardless of the devolution and the 18th Amendment, the laws still exist, regardless of how weak they are. And if it requires the council to meet X times a year, at least that should happen. The organizations that I think can play a role are organizations such as WWF, the Chambers of Commerce, where they have environment committees and other committees, Lahore Conservation Society in the city of Lahore, Pakistan Environmental Lawyers Association. There is an association of environmental lawyers. Similarly, there's an association of environmental journalists. Then the Pakistan AQI initiative was started by some residents. So I think these groups need to step up their game, not because it's their responsibility. It is still the government's responsibility, but because we are all suffering. And sometimes they underestimate the power that these groups have. So my point is that these need to become active. I just want to end by saying that the mess we're in is not a coincidence. The times that we're living in, we are sort of living in inverted times. The most important thing is being sort of brushed under the carpet, and less important things are ruling the roost. And I'll stop by saying that we're living in times where fossil fuels are the culprit of many of the environmental problems, and yet they still receive $4.7 trillion of subsidy. So we can't say everything has to fit into a market dynamics and it has to be financially viable. How come fossil fuels get so much grant money globally? And this figure comes from the IMF, so it's not from Greenpeace. The sort of key financial institutions themselves are saying it. So I'll stop with a phrase that came out recently in an article in New York Times, that Mother Earth cannot be saved if we continue to serve Father Profit. I'll end there.
Thank you, Alisa. Thank you for those comments. It's interesting because, on the one hand, if there is a public policy failure, one can think about scopes for collective action. But then I wonder, like, to what degree, what is that threshold where collective action also fails, right? Because then you need coordination among several citizens. And for example, if we need to improve Lahore's air quality, do we meet that kind of threshold requirement to get citizens to act in each other's interest, and then have collective action actually replace public policy? But I think that's an empirical question and not one that we can answer. Imran, I'll come back to you at the end, because Sara and Imrana Sahib have been waiting, so I want to give them time as well. So Sara, you're next. Can you're an environmental lawyer. You've done sort of development work in this area as well. So we'd be hoping you can share your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Sagar. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks for having me. In the interests of time, saving time, let me keep it very brief. Well, from the get-go, I just want to clarify that I don't think that air pollution is it's not a problem that the Awam can solve. It is something that the government needs to take full responsibility for. Without the government taking active steps, preventative measures, an ordinary citizen of Lahore or Pakistan really can't do much. That said, the one area where I think citizen involvement can make a huge difference is in curbing vehicular emissions. But that also, again, we need some policies in place. We need public transportation systems run on clean fuel. We need clean fuel or electric systems. We need, but all said and done, the government is still the primary, so they have to lead this movement, and they can't waste time anymore on it. There's something a lot of people have already said in this very informative session. There's one thing I do want to propose, which is that data ki bahut baat ki gayi hai about the absence of sectoral data, and we do need it. We do need it, even if we want some private sector involvement. But more than anything, we need it because we need government departments to take responsibility for their share of air pollution. China had a fantastic policy. मतलब हर मुल्क को अपनी अवाम के character का अंदाजा होता है. This is not a good or a bad thing. And we also know that we, as a nation, we thrive on incentive. And I feel like one of the greatest steps or measures that we can take at this point is incentivizing government departments and to curtail their emissions and their sectoral emissions, and then promoting them accordingly or giving them financial assistance accordingly. China did this, and it was very successful for them. The energy department in Punjab is already putting together a department-wise inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. Uski basis pe, building on it, I think government departments can really sort of pick up their game and do what they can to curtail emissions from their side. This is also one of the only ways we can make this a cross-sectoral movement, and we can make this a federal and provincial movement. So without government departments taking responsibility and without us incentivizing them to take responsibility, we really don't stand much of a chance. Uske alawa, vehicular emissions ki baat, bilkul, we can reiterate it 1,000 times, especially in urban areas. But ye main aapko bata दूं जी, just by shifting to Euro 5, and we can shift all our transportation to Euro 5, but it won't make much of a difference because cars are increasing or transportation is increasing so much. The number is increasing so much, and China went through this. Beijing, for example, and I specifically remember reading this, their smog, they couldn't bring their smog under control, even though they shifted entirely to Euro 5 because the number of cars on the road was too high. And for that, again, we must sort of have policies in place. Ab itni mushkil nahi hai. We can now, and because it has now become a public emergency, what we need to convince, I admit that it's a tough ball game, but what the government needs to do is it needs to convince people कि भाई 8 बजे के बाद ठीक है गाड़ी सड़क पे मत लाएं, curtail the number of hours जब गाड़ी सड़क पे आ सकती है. Schools have already been shut. It does make a difference. These are all adaptive measures. I don't disagree. We need preventative in the long term. But for now, small term measures, especially during months where there's very poor air quality, although it's a perennial issue, I will never disagree with that. आप अगर स्कूल बंद कर रहे हैं तो आप उसका कोई ऑल्टरनेटिव निकालें. फॉर एग्जांपल मंडे ट्यूसडे को डिफेंस में स्कूल खुले हों, वेंसडे थर्सडे को गुलबर्ग में खुले हों. If that is how it's supposed to be, then have some kind of method to the madness that's being generated. And you cannot incentivize, and I do a lot of advocacy work for climate change, but I've seen that at the very end of every sort of advocacy session, an informal regulator, a student, a business, all they turn around and say is कि भाई अगर हुकूमत नहीं करती तो हम क्यों करें? So if the government will not take charge, then we can't sort of shift responsibility or the onus onto the private sector. And one thing I do want to say, which I feel like has been lagging in the conversation, is we need heavy investment now in technology. Brick kilns, crop burning वगैरह पे बात करके I think सारा narrative ऊपर नीचे कर दिया है. The truth is Pakistan is getting a lot of funding under the ambit of climate change and in an environment. And it's time we actually sort of just dedicate it towards technology transfer. अगर smog tower रह गए हैं option, अब smog tower लगाएं. And yes, what we can do is we can as a nation sort of put pressure on the government to take these steps. I don't disagree, but the government needs to now move towards technology transfer and adopting technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. There's a good point about sustainable cities, and a good point to kind of segue into a discussion on urban development. And Imrana Tivana Sahiba has worked on is an urban development specialist, and she took our LDA to court some years ago over the signal-free corridors, which has prompted many more cars on our roads. So over to you, Imrana Sahiba, and your thoughts on this. I think you muted.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Thank you so much, Samuel, and thank you, CDPR, for this very timely and critical deliberation. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I would just like to talk about 3 things today, very briefly. I know almost everything has been said, and a lot of very important points have been raised. But just to put, we are in a critical, severe national emergency. Yes, Lahore is in a state of emergency. We can't breathe outside. We all know this. But just to give a minute of perspective to the situation. In 1952, we had the Clean Air, globally, the Clean Air Act in London. In 1998, we had the Intense Air Pollution Control Plan in China. We've had, of course, as has been mentioned, the Clean Air Commission in 2007. Mansoor Ali Shah brought that. Now I have the recommendations of the Clean Air Commission in front of me, and all of them speak the same thing, the same language that we are speaking today in 2021. They were not implemented. There has been a gross failure and discrepancy between word, letter, and spirit. And the Smog Commission was then formed. The Supreme Court, gave an order. There was a Judicial Water Commission. There has been so much that has happened. there was a Health Emergency Provision Act, which was taken out in 2013, and they were given 3 months, the EPD and the Health Department, to do something about it and operationalize it through the local government. In 2002, we had an agreement on trans-boundary haze pollution for Asian countries. So we've just 2021, we all know about the NDCs and the NCCP. And the NCCP, let me say, when you look at the document, is brilliant. It is the most environmentally proactive document that we have ever had in this country, because it talks about, and I have a whole list here. I don't have time to go into it, but it talks of Recharge Pakistan, sustainable forest management, land management, TBT, the Ecosystem Restoration Fund. I mean, the list, there are 50 things on this list. And then there are 20 departments that are meant to coordinate. So my question is, what went wrong and why, which is the question I think that has been raised by everyone. Where are the discrepancies and contradictions? So number one, the bottom line in my view is that the compliance mechanisms to implement all of these laws, act, regulations are not in place. Absolutely, we don't have the capacity. We have a discrepancy between the provincial, federal, and local governments. The local government has powers that are not being mandated to them. So there is a huge crisis of governance and legislation here, because after the 18th Amendment, things have just not been gelling. And of course, someone mentioned, and I have heard the Environment Minister say himself, that there is absolutely no smog, this is only dust. So we're talking of capacity. Then, of course, I'd like to mention things like the Rice Exporters Association, the Agriculture Department. We know all about this, the industry, what was happening. So I would like to just focus on what we need to do and what the critical larger macro forces are. And then I have a list of the immediate things we can do and some of the midterm things we can do. So we need to, it's all about urbanization, and of course rural areas play a huge role. We need a very solid, integrated is the word, green and sustainable urbanization plan for the country, which then filters down to the provinces. We are in the process of making the Lahore master plan right now. I'm a member of the TOR committee, and the vision that we have set out was clearly to put an ecological footprint and to make it environmental and people friendly. But today we had our 4th public stakeholder meeting, and the comments that went in were that there is no mention of ecology in the consultants who have been given this work. So again, there is a discrepancy here. However, I think that there are checks and balances now. So what do we mean by integrated planning? And I want to talk about zoning and mobility and setting boundaries. And I think Temina and Kulsoom and some others have mentioned, it is critical to understand what we're dealing with when we continue to make Lahore bigger and bigger and bigger. We have no boundaries, we have no zoning. We continue to make new central business districts like the Walton Airport district, which makes absolutely no sense. The ecological footprint is not defined. So we have, what do we end up with? A chaotic imbalance. And I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that in Lahore, 90% of the people in Lahore live in 10% of its area, and 10% live in 90% of the land use. So you can imagine when you look at Lahore, you know, you have an aerial view, there is complete chaos here. The mobility systems, the transport systems are not in place because we keep expanding. Most of the housing schemes are not marked. So there have to be definitive boundaries to Lahore and to the city and zoning so that we know what we're dealing with and we know, you know, the input and output that it needs. So There was talk, we have no water treatment plant in Lahore, for instance, and somebody said that we need 1 crore for one plant and it needs 2 canals of land. There was talk about agriculture of rice burning, that we can get equipment which costs more, so the farmers are not using that. I just want to draw a small one comparison here, and that comparison is that when we were making the Orange Train Metro project, at the end of it, we spent 3.5 billion US dollars on this project in one province, on one project. So there is no dearth of money. Let me repeat, there is no dearth of money. It is the appropriation, the prioritization of how that money is to be used. Just under the TBTTP, I mean, there are just millions and millions of dollars that have come in to assist us. And someone mentioned the World Bank fund that has come in. I mean, there are so many. So I think we need to stop saying that we don't have the money. We do have the money. We need to prioritize what we need to do with this money, how we need to contain our cities. Now, China, for example, decided many years ago, of course, the model that they used to clean the air we've talked about, but they decided that cities had to be limited. And so a huge network of secondary and tertiary cities were made. But these were made according to an integrated master zonal plan, which put in the transport. And now we have SEZs, right? We have our special economic zones. And if you read what the zones say, there are no taxes, there are subsidies, there are rebates. So why are we not focusing on taking all our industry into the economic zones? Someone mentioned cottage industry, and let me tell you that no one knows. They are not listed, they're not documented. No one knows how much cottage industry we have in this country. So yes, data, many people have said this, is a very important point. Taxation, incentives, and subsidies. But most of all, to cover all this, I would say that we need green and sustainable protocols after we make the prioritized green and sustainable master planning and zoning for Pakistan and for its cities. I could go on, but I will end here about this. And as far as you had asked us to talk about immediate, midterm, and long-term solutions, I think that although so much has been done and so much has been said, and we're talking about reducing, the NDCs talk about reducing the emissions to 50% by 2030 or 2050. How are we going to do this? I mean, we have had so much before this. On paper, it looks fantastic. So I think that we should pick up what we have. I think the policies are great on paper. We need to pick all of them up, and we need a prioritized vision and roadmap, which can be done very quickly. But some of the immediate steps, they're so basic. I mean, there are things like, for instance, everyone and their grandmother is having a wedding these days, and every wedding has 6 functions. Dholki ho rahi hai, dance practice ho rahi hai, it's in the outdoor, it's inside. There are many cars that go to that. There is a whole service industry that feeds that. There should be an immediate ban on all functions, indoor and outdoor, from November to February. People can plan their events and whatever they need to do between these months, and the rest can happen on social media via Zoom. There needs to be an immediate reduction in vehicles on the road. Car diet days, I think it's very important. The brick kilns should be told to close down for 2 months, zigzag or not. Do we even understand what sort of dire health emergency we're in? We need to shut these down, and it's been done in India, where they shut the construction industry for 3 months when things get really bad. But we all know, of course, that this is perennial, it's there throughout the year. So it's not getting all, sort of worried when October approaches. This needs to be a very well thought out annual plan. But for then there should be a very serious clampdown on checks on emissions. I mean, if the motorway can work so well with if you speed, you immediately get a ticket, why can the city of Lahore not get wardens that are standing at every half a kilometer, checking the car and seeing if there are emissions and confiscating the car? Unless we do radical things, we are not going to see a change, and more people will die. And this city will become unbearable. As it is, we are at we are at evacuation at over 300-400. The WHO says that cities should be evacuated, and here we are with our children playing outside, and waste management. And I'm just ending here, just a minute more. It's a huge issue. We have no waste management, water treatment plants here. Why are we not converting waste to energy? Why is this waste not going to the cement plants? It did go to one of the cement plants years ago, and they used it for energy. And of course, they need to put filters there. But there need to be huge fines and confiscations. Treatment plants need to come in. The ban on burning is already in place, like Ali said. There is a ban on waste, on crop burning, on it. But every single day, we see 100 posts that say, this is burning, that is. Why is this happening? So we really need to, I don't want to use the word police, but we need to get up and pull our socks up, and the federal government and the provincial government need to be told that these are measures which have to be taken so that the process can start. I think the process is completely jumbled. The mandate, most of the mandate lies with the local bodies, and they're not there. The provincial government has no capacity. There is no coordination between the federal government, the post-18th Amendment. However, the laws are all very good. Heating and cooling systems, generators, air conditioning, plazas that go up, educational institutions. I mean, the paints that we use, I could just go on and on. The industry, the construction industry, the methane that is given out, in conversions. So I would just like to end by saying that in the immediate term, perhaps we really need to look at the ground realities and put these 7 points together, go to the government and talk about it immediately. In the midterm, I think we need to make more bylaws, compliance mechanisms, but most of all, a transition roadmap. It's very important. It has been mentioned before today that unless you have a transition roadmap, when we were doing the rickshaws, when they were being converted from 2 to 4 stroke, there was no roadmap. And so the rickshaw union came and they lay down on the road and they said, "Ji, hamare bachon ko aapne maar diya, hamari rozi maar di." And so immediately when we went and tried to do the plastics, the Chamber of Commerce, as Ali has already mentioned, promised that they would do something about the steel re-rolling mills. But when we had the plastics meeting, the industry was violent, and I use the word violent. They attacked physically, because there was no transition roadmap. So yes, in the midterm, in fact, immediately, we need to start a transition roadmap for each sector, for each industry, for planning, for zoning, for mobility, for setting boundaries, for making new cities. And of course, immediately, we need to get all of this going, the few points that I've mentioned. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Imran Sahib. We're really looking forward to seeing this new master plan, and I hope they're now looking at the ecologies of cities within that. Before I know we're like over time, but I just want, if it's okay with you, I just want to take another couple of minutes. Eamon or Shahryar, can you put up that question? This is like, open house kind of discussion. We do want to see, we engage in a lot of programmatic endeavors with the government, and part of it is to kind of see how do we make existing measures or existing programs especially existing programs, existing social and financial programs, how do we tie them to tangible, robust, and measurable air quality outcomes? So it'll be great to have some of your thoughts. Kulsum Sahaba, you already have your hand up, so I'll just go to you.
Thank you. I think that's where the economists come in. I think you need what we did at the bank. Deepa Narayan has done some very well-known work where she actually asked the poor what they wanted. And what was really striking out of that piece of work was that it was health issues that usually when you go make that transition from extreme poverty to the next level, it's like a ladder, but you go up and down those rungs. You don't just escape and stay there. You tend to fall back into poverty multiple times. And when she actually asked the poor in a lot of countries what was the issue, the answer came back that it was primarily health. And if you look at what, and health as in their kids falling ill or themselves falling ill or some family member, and therefore they were pulled back into extreme poverty. As a result of that, a lot of there's been a lot of discussion, particularly in Africa. There was a Libreville Declaration in 2008 between, I think, over 50 countries, health and environment ministries, that they would actually work together to stop this slide back into extreme poverty for the poor, because in developing countries, 60 or 70% of the burden of disease, the health outcomes, and you can look at the World Health Organization produces these burden of disease reports for Pakistan. You're going to see for any country, developing country, it's environmental factors, air quality, water, sanitation, that actually create 70% of those health outcomes that are it may be different now with COVID, but certainly those were the ones. So that was actually the biggest argument. And there's a lot of literature on this. I can send you, this is a book, Poverty, Health and Environment, which gets into that. That was done by 18 agencies, the UN, the World Bank, World Resources, NGOs, and even like UK DFID and multiple other countries. There's this too, which was done with the World Health Organization. You all are talking about deaths, but actually probably a bigger issue. And there's a case study on Pakistan in here, 2005 data. A bigger issue is the fact that if you have repeated episodes under the age of 2, of these environmental diseases like diarrhea, air quality issues, etc., and malnutrition, you reduce IQ of your children. And by doing that, you're reducing productivity at the country level. So this 2005 data said that this is costing the country, it's 10% of GDP, environmental degradation. So I think it's these types of studies by economists such as yourself that actually need to be done to actually convince the government that this is actually central to the Kamyab Pakistan program. If indeed that holds true, as held true for certainly every developing country I've worked on, in like over 60 of them. And I worked with the World Health Organization on this because I actually set up the environmental health program at the World Bank as a result of this research that was done and the data that came out. And therefore we decided, okay, we need to look at environment, not just as, just ecology, but look at it in terms of human beings and how their health is affected. So I'm happy to send you some of that for you to look at later.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just sort of tied to that, we did a recent randomized control trial on providing air pollution forecasts to people in Lahore, sort of lower middle income areas. And during our baseline surveys, to get people motivated, we had to basically teach them exactly what PM 2.5 is, and had to do that with diagrams. And that's when people kind of understood what the pollutant looks like. And then we tied them to kind of health outcomes. And after that, once we did our intervention, we saw sort of, statistically significant impacts on willingness to pay for avoidance goods as a result. So if you don't sort of control for the fact that people understand what the issue is, and one the key way, as you say, is if they can translate those impacts into something that they realize themselves, something like health, then interventions become much more difficult to implement. So anyone else wanna have a crack at this?
If I may, and I'm not really sure whether I'll be able to do it, but I just wanted to say that we really need to have a different vision when it comes to our developmental trajectories and priorities. We've been having this discussion on the number of laws that we already have. I keep going back to the National Conservation study, the NCS, that was done in 1992, and it talks about all of these things that we're talking about today. 30 years on, we're still facing these problems, and so it's just that I'm not even so the question that I would have had for Ali Saab, that would have been that, look, yes, having these meetings led by the Prime Minister on a yearly basis are good, but then to what's the output? Having these meetings at the provincial level are good, but then what's the output? Given the fact that these meetings lead to a commission, and that commission does wonderful work, so there is this aspect of AQI that didn't come out very well, but other than that, the SMOG commission, the recommendations are exactly what we've been suggesting here as well. So what's the next step? And I'm not really sure whether there is one. I for one, am highly pessimistic as to what can be done. We are currently firefighting. That's what we are doing, and we're trying to address some of the comments that are coming by one minister or the Prime Minister or whoever may be there. But I'm not really sure there is a long-term strategy at hand, and I'm sure that this discussion is a part of that. One thing I think that we really need to do is to have that vision, and then also think of environment beyond the externalities, right? So as policymakers and economists and decision makers, environment has always been discussed in the form of an externality, or the impacts therein. It's never been considered an asset, right? So we haven't put a cost figure on what having clean air in a city like Lahore, what would that amount to, or having clean drinking water available to everyone, what would that amount to? And perhaps putting across figures, dollar amounts to a certain amount of clean air might be the way forward, but I'm not really sure. At this time, I'm just guessing. So just wanted to put it out there, and I'm sorry it doesn't answer your question here. Thank you.
Let me make it clear for you, Imran. As an economist, that's the only lens we see the problem through, right? You have to put a dollar value to be able to make sort of understand trade-offs and make decisions. Mahmood Saab, are you with us? Because I think you mentioned this, about आपने वो बात की थी technology adoption and access to credit, etc., and how do we kind of incentivize farmers to adopt better technologies. And part of this, these new programs, especially something like the Kamyab Pakistan Programme, for example, is that it's designed to extend credit to people who are on the margins, right? So आप किस तरह देख रहे हैं कि अगर फार्मर्स को इनकरेज करना है कि वो बेहतर प्रैक्टिसेस अडॉप्ट करें या टेक्नोलॉजीज, तो हम ये प्रोग्राम किस तरह लेवरेज कर सकते हैं? Mahmood Saab? Okay, he might he's unmuted, but he might not have a good.
आपको मेरी आवाज आ रही है जी?
जी अब आ रही है जी।
अच्छा, ऐसे है कि हम ऑलरेडी हमने स्टार्ट किया हुआ है रेलिवेंट प्रोग्राम जो हैं, और
फार्मर्स को जो राइट मशीनरी है वो हमने ऑलरेडी उनको देना शुरू की हुई है, और ये पिछले 2 साल से हम ऑलरेडी कर रहे हैं, और वी कंटिन्यू प्रोवाइडिंग दिस मशीनरी सब्सिडी टू द फार्मर्स। और अभी जो प्राइम मिनिस्टर का एग्रीकल्चर ट्रांसमिशन प्लान आया है, विच इज ए मल्टी बिलियन इनिशिएटिव, उसमें भी हम जो एक मैकेनाइजेशन का जो काम है उसको एक बिगर लेवल पे लेके जा रहे हैं, और उसमें वो तमाम मशीनरी जो कि फार्मर्स को चाहिए, जिसका मैं पहले जिक्र किया था कि जो पैडी स्ट्रा चॉपर्स हैं, और इसके अलावा जो इंपोर्टेड मशीनरी है फॉर प्रॉपर हार्वेस्टिंग, और प्रॉपर हार्वेस्टिंग के लिए एक और मशीनरी है हैप्पी सीडर या पार्क सीडर्स। हम ये तमाम मशीनरी जो है अगले 5 साल में कंटिन्यूसली ऑन 60% सब्सिडी अक्रॉस दी प्रोविंस वो हम प्रोवाइड कर रहे होंगे। हमने अभी तक कोई तकरीबन 500-700 मशीनें जो हैं वो हैप्पी सीडर्स और राइस स्ट्रा चॉपर जो हैं वो हमने ऑलरेडी दी हुई हैं, लेकिन ये बहुत कम है। हम समझते हैं कि शायद इसके ऊपर मजीद इन्वेस्टमेंट करने की जरूरत थी। दैट्स व्हाई द एग्रीकल्चर ट्रांसमिशन प्लान कंटिन्यू प्रोवाइडिंग द मशीनरी टू द फार्मर्स ऑन सब्सिडी। एक तो ये हो गया। इसके अलावा हमारा जो एक फार्मर ट्रेनिंग का प्रोग्राम है, उसके जरिए से हम फार्मर अवेयरनेस अबाउट द हेल्थ हैजर्ड्स ऑफ स्मॉग जो है एंड हेल्थ हैजर्ड्स ऑफ बर्निंग क्रॉप्स जो है वो कंटिन्यूसली हम कर रहे होते हैं ड्यूरिंग स्पेशली ड्यूरिंग these winter 3 months starting from mid October or start of October to December. इसके अलावा हम डिफरेंट एडवर्टाइजमेंट्स हैं, टीवीसीज हैं टीवी के ऊपर, और प्रॉपर लिटरेचर इसके ऊपर जो है फार्मर्स की ट्रेनिंग में हम उनको प्रोवाइड करते रहते हैं। लेकिन इसका जो असल सोल्यूशन है वो यही है कि जब तक आप फार्मर को कोई अल्टरनेट नहीं देंगे फॉर द बर्निंग ऑफ देयर क्रॉप्स, वो तब तक ये प्रैक्टिस चलती रहेगी। जुर्माने भी हमने लगा दिए, साल 50,000 रुपये जुर्माना भी कर दिया गया, कोई 200-250 अरेस्ट भी की गई, ठीक है, कोई 2,500 के करीब FIR भी काट दी गई, ठीक है। इस सारे के बावजूद जो प्रैक्टिस ऑफ बर्निंग है वो स्टॉप नहीं हो पाती, कम हुई है। हमारी अपनी एस्टिमेशन ये है कि बिकॉज ऑफ ऑल दीज मेजर्स और राइट मशीनरी भी आई है पिछले साल की निस्बत इस साल, प्राइवेट जो सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स हैं वो भी मशीनरी लेके आए हैं, लेकिन जब तक हम एक मेजर हार्वेस्टिंग मशीनरी जो है, प्रॉपर मशीनरी जो है वो हम मार्केट में अवेलेबल नहीं करेंगे, तब तक ये सिचुएशन चलती रहेगी। एंड आई थिंक एग्रीकल्चर डिपार्टमेंट पंजाब इज ऑन द राइट ट्रैक टू प्रोवाइड all these machineries on a subsidy basis and on a sustainable basis in coming 5 years. Thank you.
Okay, great, wonderful. Guys, okay, so I think we've, we're at the 2.5 hour mark, so I will conclude the workshop here. I just want to say this was great. Like, I learned a lot, and I think we should do this more often because, just sort of, again, bouncing ideas off each other, I think it really helps. And it has, there's a lot of stuff that I learned, which I didn't know before. And this is pretty eye-opening, and hope to thank you again for joining. And yeah, Imrana Sahaba, you want to say something?
I just very quickly, thank you so much. Sorry to cut you, but I have a small proposal that I'd like to make to the EPD and to the Chamber of Commerce. And that is that this is a wonderful discussion, and I think we have all the points, and I'm very confident and very positive that it will lead to something incredible. But right now, I'd like to request the Chamber and the EPD to put together an awareness program which is citywide, which is in the form of billboards and flyers and things that people don't know, the comparative, the issues about health. Kulsoom is absolutely right. Of course, urbanization, transport, at the end of the day, it's about our health. And so it needs to be out there on every billboard in the city, on TV, flyers. People should be, so I think an immediate program which should be put into effect within 10 days should be started, which can be funded by the chamber, just as a first very small step, and an awareness program that the EPD can do, given, I don't know what the figure was, that Rafe or someone said they've got so many $1 million to improve the EPD. I think that they need to invest this in what is and must be a priority. And we should start seeing this. You know, the common man is not aware. They have no idea. उनके बच्चे बाहर खेल रहे हैं, उनको पता ही नहीं कि ये क्या है. मेरा ख्याल है सबसे पहले, this is a very, very important part. Thank you.
Actually, it's the first thing we did in Bogota, where people, to address air quality, was actually have a campaign. Yeah. After doing a survey and understanding who actually understood. Most people don't think that air quality is making you sick at all. They think when you have your heart attack or stroke, it's due to, I don't know, food, lack of exercise, all the rest of it. It may well be, but it's also air quality. And this reducing the IQ of your children, so their educational performance, cognitive development, all that is worse. That's kind of the ultimate, at least for me.
And also,
I may live 5 years less, but you don't want your kids, everybody in the world wants their kids to do better than you. That's any person in any country in the world. And this is kind of the last straw in terms of.
Yeah, you take your O-level exams or your metric exams on a egregiously polluted day, and Lord, that's just, and you don't do well because of a cognitive dysfunction, and that's
not just on a polluted day, Sanval. It actually gets it's cumulative. You're actually breathing it in, so your IQ levels are being affected. It's like lead in gasoline, literally, which people have banned now. So that's kind of, it's literally the same idea. That's what's happening. Anyway, I will send you the papers, and I think doing a public campaign in Lahore, which is actually the perfect place to do it, because everybody's understood this issue, but they still say, oh, we've lived with it for ages, so it must be okay. It isn't okay.
I just wanted to also add, Kulsoom, that if we somehow look at the statistics on how it impacts pre-born children who are not born, it is astounding that before we bring these people into the world, they're already compromised. And I think that, these are, there is a huge imbalance now between, what our priorities, between just human existence. We don't have a choice. And so I would really urge that, I'm confident and hopeful of, moving forward and sharing many more talks with all of you, but we should really start this as a first. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I just want to reiterate that this was a fantastic, I really learned a lot from this workshop, and I hope to, sit together with you guys soon again. And, hopefully we can make some meaningful or inform some meaningful changes in our policy on air quality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.